What is up, everybody? Justin Burns here. Welcome to this video. In this video, we are going to be talking about the idea matrix. This is the key formula to be able to choose $1 million plus ideas as it relates to your app. But you could also use this when it comes to digital products. So let me kind of just make sure that you understand the process and why ideation is so important. You know, most people don't even understand why you need core ideation. Well, nothing sucks more than choosing an idea that doesn't make any money, but also doesn't help us grow our businesses. All right. So when people are trying to choose ideas or they're trying to choose a product, most of the time they skip this step, which is why they don't get the results that they truly, truly want. All right. Ideation is so important. Now, you also use the idea matrix, and I'm going to break down what the idea matrix is in a second, but you also use ideation and idea matrix when you're also going through kind of those slow sales times, you know what I'm talking about, right? So when you kind of hit kind of like the fork in the road or your sales has slowed down, you also want to make sure you go through the idea matrix to identify whether it is that you need to develop new features, whether you kind of need a new spin on what it is that you're doing. And how I actually came across kind of creating the idea matrix is I realized that many people, as I said before, they skip this step. And when you skip this step and you don't know how to choose the right idea, you skip this process and you end up failing miserably because you have picked a product or you've picked an idea that nobody wants. Or, like I said, when your idea has went stale, so you will have a digital product or you have a software, then, let's just say your sales are slowing down. It's because you reached this capitalization process where your market has heard this idea before. So you kind of need to adjust. And this is happening to a lot of marketers, a lot of business people, where they don't make this adjustment process. And then they go through this process of failure thinking that it's their product, when in actuality, it's the fact that they don't understand the idea matrix. But this is mainly, you're going to use this process when you are trying to think through the process of how do I choose an idea? How do I choose a software? How do I choose an app or even a digital product that makes people want to buy? Okay. And so I want to kind of go through this process so that you really understand. Okay. And I'm looking off because I want to share my screen in a second because I want you to really get this framework. I want you to understand the process and the methodology behind you can pick winners and how you can kind of skip your, kind of avoid making this big failure. All right. So what I want to do is kind of take you through this process. So when it comes down to your idea, you want to be able to, and you're picking like a app idea. So we're going to kind of mainly move towards apps. When you are kind of choosing an idea, you want to describe your app idea in 1 to 2 sentences. This is where you articulate the core concept of your application because you want to be clear, right? There's nothing more frustrating than picking an idea that you can't even describe. And I'll tell you that messaging, the core concept of your idea as it comes to apps, is you want to be able to describe in so much specificity that, hey, here's what my idea does, and here is the problem that it solves. So the first concept is that you got to know who you're targeting. You need to know exactly who your niche is. You want to be so specific that you understand with absolute clarity that, hey, here's the problem that I'm solving, and here is who I'm solving it for. And most people don't know that they don't actually have the clarity to that. So here is some answers. Here's some things that I do when I am trying to go down the path of choosing an idea that fits, right? So this is called the decision tree. Number 1 is, does a solution already exist? Okay. Does a solution already exist? Is there a product or service that already solves this problem, even if it's not perfect? Okay. Then number 2, does your idea improve on an existing solution? One of the fastest ways to profit in today that has so much competition and so much there's a lot of competition, right? Because as technology becomes easier, right? People see the opportunity, and especially if they're vibe coding or they choose some of these tools, again, you have to be able to stand out. And the fastest way that you're able to do that is to, one, choose what we call bridging the gap opportunity. I'm going to explain that in a second. But you bridge the gap. You find out what the pressing problems are in the marketplace. You improve upon that. You take it to a specific niche. And I'm telling you, that is where the money is. That is where the wealth is. And that's why we call this the idea matrix, because it's like going into a sea of so much possibilities and saying, all right, here's how I'm going to separate myself. Here's the thinking that I'm going to have as I approach an idea. And I'm telling you that 99% of people don't think this way, right? And this is how we're going to have our competitive advantage. So you want to see how you can improve upon an idea. Number 3 is your idea a novel combination of existing processes? So you can also combine ideas as well. All right. So one of my favorite is called bridging the gap method. And let me explain what bridging the gap means. All right. Bridging the gap means that you identify what the gap is as you go through solutions. You often have probably heard about this in other videos, but when I am choosing an idea, and why the fact I have over 30,000 customers is because what I typically do is I go out there and I go to sites like Product Hunt or TechCrunch, or I go to like Beta List and all these different sites. And what I do is I'm looking at customer complaints. I'm looking at what is the gap. When you hear people say bridging the gap, is looking at opportunities that did not exist before. Okay, let me give you an example of this. There is a company called Typeform, right? You might have heard of it, but Typeform has, they're a form builder. They have all these different forms. And so what you'll notice in Typeform is a gigantic company. They do almost close to $100 million in profit. Great company. I've used them before. But there's some bridging the gap opportunities, because if you go to like Trustpilot, and you'll see that people are mainly complaining about the pricing of the product. They're complaining about how they don't get a lot. So, and this is not a shot at Typeform to say that they're not valuable. It's just, this is the data that we're seeing on Trustpilot. So the bridging the gap opportunity will be that, hey, listen, I can now go into the market. I can create a similar competitor to Typeform, and I can see that pricing is frustrating. So let me create a lower solution. Let me resolve the customer issues. So actually a company did this, and they're really smart for doing this, called uform.com. I was listening to this podcast from this guy, and I think they're at like $20,000 a month, but they did this very thing. They identified the opportunity, the gap in the marketplace. And what they end up doing is they said, all right, here's an existing solution. Step 1, we find an existing solution. Step 2, we go in and we identify the gap. And that was the pricing, right? So what you want to identify is, what do customers complain the most about? When you go through the reviews, when you go through the Reddit threads, when you go through Twitter, when you go through these things, what are they complaining about? Is the UX, is the user experience confusing, right? Does it answer, like, what features are missing? One of my favorite ways of the idea matrix is to identify what features are missing, what's outdated. Now, how can you apply this to also digital products and other things that you're doing? Well, you can also apply this to those things, because if you're a coach or a speaker and you have a digital product, one of the things you could do is say, what is not being talked about right now? Similar to identifying the gap. What is not being talked about right now, right? What's the most pressing thing that's going on? And if you can put a new spin on it, then you're going to refresh the way the marketplace looks at you. Is it a new concept? Is it something that people are talking about, they're interested in? I actually gave this to a friend recently, where it was around the real estate niche. For the past like 2 or 3 years, everybody and their mother who was teaching about real estate was talking about Airbnb and beating it down. Like, Airbnb, you can make money Airbnb. And I'm not saying that messaging doesn't work anymore. Here's what I'm saying though. The market in that particular market is used to everybody talking about real estate and Airbnb. So what if you switched it, where you start talking about a different angle of real estate that everybody was talking about, right? And also thinking about where the market is. If everybody is concerned about money, then you need to be also apply your methodology to, hey, here's what people are talking about, especially if you're going after the general consumer. You need to think about your customer, right? So that is what bridging the gap is all about. Bridging, or should I say, the idea matrix. The idea matrix is all about finding an idea, especially if you're developing an app. It's about finding an idea. It's about doubling down on an idea, finding what the gaps are in the marketplace, and also making sure that you go in and you solve those challenges. And that's how you are going to win and have a winning app idea. All right. If you love this video, make sure that you go ahead, subscribe, like, and comment below. Let me know if this has helped you kind of change your perspective on what it means to develop a winning $1 million idea using the idea matrix. All right. So share this video out. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.